As if your normal amount of existential dread isn't enough, do you want to talk about a Sumerian disease deity that can end existence as we know it? Good morning, sunshine. Happy Monday, and welcome back to Tiger's Occult Books and Research. I hope everyone's had a great weekend. I know I had a thoroughly surreal one. Ran into some other company employees in the field, then I had the opportunity to sit down and hang out with a very dear brother in arms and the single best battalion commander I've ever served with. And then one of our independent associated researchers, Morgan Ratcliffe, dumped a metric boatload of translations and materials regarding the Asag on my desk. So it's been an interesting weekend. I'm your friendly internet paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today we're going all the way back to Sumerian and Akkadian mythology again to take a look at the Asag. Asag? I think we'll go with Asag. Now, the Asag wasn't mentioned in our usual material, but surprise, surprise, I found it in Bain's Encyclopedia of Demons in World Mythology and the Routledge Dictionary of Gods and Goddesses, Devils, and Demons. Coupled with Ratcliffe's translations and a smattering of further research, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does, we'll address any ethical concerns, and then we'll make sure we go over safe interaction with the entity if you should ever come across it during your travels, although honestly, I think we're all praying we miss this one. So let's get started with the origins. The main piece of literature regarding this entity is Lugal-E, a Mesopotamian myth written sometime around the late 3rd millennium BC, sometime around 2150 BC, to be a little bit more specific, according to Dr. William W. Hollow's 2009 work, The World's Oldest Literature, Studies in Sumerian Belles Lettres. However, Ratcliffe has found a rather interesting collection of ancient Mesopotamian administrative records where Asag was actually occasionally recorded as the cause of death of both people and farm animals. So that's going to start us off on an extremely ominous footing. However, careful analysis of the administrative documentation gives us an interesting conclusion. It appears that the term Asag is used as both a proper noun to refer to a specific entity like a name, and also as a common noun to refer to a class of entities with similar behaviors. As a result, I'm inclined to kind of believe the latter. Asag refers to a type of entity that seems to be proficient in causing disease. However, there is a capital A proper noun, Asag. Ratcliffe also brought up the point eloquently and accurately. She said, delineating one usage from the other seems purely contextual, and we can view this as similar to the way English treats the term devil, where there is the devil, singular. But there can also be various devils, i.e., bad spirits, bad people, etc. Although, if you ask me, the only good devils are those red devils in baggy pants. But again, I'm betraying my biases. That dude really was the best battalion commander I ever worked for. Anyway, let's get back to the topic and into the physical identification methods. So here, we have a 9th century BC bas-relief recovered from the temperature of Niederreiter in Kalhu, which is modern-day Nimrud, Iraq. However, a bit of interesting piece of trivia here. This carving shows the climax of Lugal-E. The warrior god Ninurta is chasing down the roaring winged monster, throwing thunderbolts at it. But the image the Sumerians carved doesn't quite match the textual description. Which brings up another interesting point. The current depiction of an Asag is a large, round, three-legged, three-armed creature with no neck and eyes covering its entire bulk. That specific description seems to have come from one of the earlier Dungeons & Dragons manuals because the game mechanics require concrete anatomical descriptions. Specifically, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition, and in a magazine published in August of 2005. Now, I can't really fault D&D too much, especially back in 2005. The author's primary focus was on making the game fun and playable, not on pedantic academic accuracy. The pedantic academic accuracy is my job. Come to think of it, Those folks ought to hire me to make corrections. I bet they pay more than working for a stuffed tiger in a basement research lab. Anyway, thanks to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature available from the University of Oxford, we can read the actual text of Lugal E. The text describes the Asag as an arrogant male whose face knows no shame, who is impudent of eye. It's noted for rejoicing in his stature, as well as tossing his horns among plants like a great wild bull. Later lines between 168 and 186 note that the Asag slid his head along the ground like a snake and howled in a raucous voice like an accursed storm. So basically, as Dr. Jeremy Black and Dr. Anthony Green's 1992 work, Gods, Demons, and Symbols of Ancient Mesopotamia, an Illustrated Dictionary, puts it, and I quote, the Asag was hideously repulsive in appearance, and his power caused fish to boil alive in the rivers. So when we start looking into the CDI taxonomy, we start to run into a couple questions. We know it was never human, so class 1 through 4 is right out. Class 5 generally refers to never human spiritual manifestations, but in this particular instance right here, I don't think it's appropriate. Class 6 is usually an animal or cryptid type entity, so that's out. However, when it comes to the three omnis of deification, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, the Asag actually meets the latter criteria, omnipotence, making it a class 7. We know it's got a corporeal form, so that's going in the string. Lugal E tells us that it uprooted the sky and used it as a club. It dried up the waters of the mountains, dragged away the tamarisks, tore the flesh of the earth, and covered her with painful wounds, set fire to the reed beds, bathed the sky in blood, turned it inside out. It also mated with the earth, spreading its seeds far and wide, raising an army of its stone-based offspring. So, all told, our class description identification string for the Asag, proper noun, is a class 7 corporeal animating disease deity. When we get into the threat level, we're actually going to call this one a threat level 6. This is an apocalyptic, reality warping deity capable of total annihilation and fundamental restructuring of our reality as we know it. Any interaction with this entity is likely to result in the end of existence as we know it. That being said, looking into Lugal E as well as those court documents indicated Asag as a cause of death seems to show us that a lower level entity as a common noun, remember? It's my interpretation, having read the legend, that when the hero Niederreiter stabbed the Asag in the liver and killed it, Asag's physical form and power collapsed and broke apart, separating it into a multitude of smaller fragments of its power and intent. So, fortunately, we're likely never going to have to deal with the Class 7 Asag. Ninerta handled that problem for us thousands of years ago. However, the common noun Asag weren't destroyed and were used to describe a multitude of diseases for generations after that fight. And I'm fairly sure as we continue our journey in world mythology, we'll probably find several other cultures that encountered disease-causing entities with identical behaviors, but were unaware of the Asag, both proper and common noun, and wound up naming it something else. To support that conclusion, it's common knowledge, all right, at least if you pay pedantic attention to Sumerian mythology anyway, that the Akkadian term for this same entity is Asaku. As a result, the common noun Asag would be a class 5 ethereal, free-roaming, vaporous, biocentric infester. The common noun Asag doesn't seem to have a fixed physical form. Instead, it's described as a toxic, vaporous miasma. It's not locked down to any one location, instead roaming freely. Lastly, its primary method of interaction with our dimension is to attach itself to a biological host to cause a fever or a localized physical plague, or both if it gets the chance. The threat level, thankfully, of the common noun Asag is markedly reduced to threat level 3, moderate threat. Sure, they're actively predatory and vindictive, but they don't seem to be particularly intelligent or even cognitive. They're mere wisps of proper noun Asag's power and intent, floating aimlessly, but causing great damage when they infest a biological entity. Fortunately, because only the common noun class 5 threat level 3 Asag exist anymore, we're a lot better off and we can defend against them. I will cover that in a minute. Before we get into the folklore tales and legends, just a quick reminder, if you'd like to support our documentation of these entities and receive updates on upcoming profiles and topics, please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to get notified every time we cover a new entity. I'd also like to invite you to join our Discord server to discuss these findings with, fellow investigators and enthusiasts. And now, on to the folklore tales and legends. I've referenced Lugal-e repeatedly, so now it's time for the Cliff's Notes version. If you'd like to read the whole translation for yourself, I'll include a link to Oxford University's translation in the description box down below. So, Ninurta, the god warrior god, is warned that in the distant mountains a hideous and powerful demon, the Asag, was born, and was actively mating with the mountains and creating a massive army of living stones. Ninurta takes his magical mace, Sharor, and rushes up the mountains to fight Asag. The first fight is inconclusive. The Asag is able to force a stalemate, and Ninurta sends his mace to get some coaching from Enlil, the Mesopotamian supreme sky god. Enlil tells Sharur, the talking mace, to tell Ninurta to take Asag by the shoulder and stab it in the liver. So Ninurta does so, but the ensuing battle destroys the environment, blocking access to mountain water and leaving the plains to suffer devastating droughts. Ninurta goes ahead and re-engineers the landscape, using dead stones to build dams to channel the mountain snowmelt into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, thereby inventing irrigation and agriculture for all of humanity. Ninurta also puts the stones that Asag sired on trial for participating in that army. The stones that fought against Ninurta were cursed to be chipped, burned, or otherwise used by humanity somehow. Stones like flint, limestone, that sort of thing. The stones that didn't go along with Asag were blessed to be used as sacred stones for statues and temples, light duty type stuff. And I guess everyone except Asag and the stones that fought Ninurta lived happily ever after. Anyway, Morgan Radcliffe's translations that they dropped on my desk are a fascinating read if you enjoy going through ancient court proceedings and other administrative lists. The first one they dropped off is an administrative cuneiform tablet from the Istanbul Archaeological Museum labeled India Tango Tango 306550 that seems to cover a court proceeding. It contains the phrase Lalagula, whom the Asag has struck, indicating that individual, Lalagula, was sickened by disease, blamed on what I would believe to be our Class 5 common noun, Asag. The next tablet was labeled India Tango Tango 407805 and is currently housed at the Louvre in Paris. This one is an administrative document that's somewhat unclear, but it does have a reference to an ox that died of a diseased demon. Tablet Hotel Sierra 1464 is at the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena, Germany, and that one has an incantation to protect against Asag. Overall, it seems to be a magical text focusing on healing magics. Hotel Sierra 1540, also at the Friedrich Schiller University, contains more magical spells and incantations regarding using a goat to draw an Asag out of a person and then to sacrifice the goat. There's a significant amount of translation work here, and I feel bad for going with the Cliff's Notes, but I fear this is running a little bit long for our purposes. If you'd like me to go on a deep dive and read all of these translation notes, let me know in the comments section down below. I'd love to do it. But otherwise, I fear I'm kind of close to losing just about everyone else's attention. This gets very, very dry. Instead, let's get to the ethical considerations of dealing with Asag. If we're looking at the proper noun Class 7 Asag, it is a moral and ethical imperative to destroy Asag by any means necessary in order to save the human race and Earth in general. Its very presence causes rivers to boil, entire local ecosystems to collapse, so that thing's gotta go. Fortunately, Ninurta took care of that, so it's not a probable scenario we'll find ourselves in. If we're looking at the common noun, class 5 Asag, well, the conversation shifts significantly from apocalyptic, end-of-the-world self-defense to a much more tame, if overly tired, discussion about biomedical ethics and clinical intervention. So, informed consent, triage, that sort of thing. That's the more important ethical discussion to be had. At that point in time, Asag are more or less just a malevolent paranatural disease, and there's little question about ridding ourselves of those entities. As for the safe interaction protocols, if we were to encounter the proper noun class 7 Asag, there is no method of safe interaction. The Sumerian civilization had to get their warrior god Ninurta to take care of it. As we heard in the legends, that was a particularly brutal and destructive fight. Fortunately, Ninurta took care of that problem for us, so all we're liable to really encounter anymore is the common noun, class 5 Asag. There were a couple methods the Sumerians used to defend themselves from those Asag. The first set of defenses were the Marduk-Ea Incantations. I find the Marduk-Ea Incantations particularly fascinating, mainly because they've got a whole article about being used for almost 3,000 years on the National Library of Medicine's PubMed page. Two professionals would work in concert, the Asipu, the ritual exorcist, and the Asu, the herbal physician. The Asipu would write a protective spell formula onto a clay cylinder that looks kind of like that, and would place it around the patient's neck while reciting lines from Lugal-E, reminding the common noun Asag of the proper noun Asag's defeat at the hands of Ninurta. The Asu would basically do their best to manage the physical symptoms while the Asipu worked. The second method was used if the Asag refused to cooperate with the first method. The Asipu would attempt to trick the Asag into leaving the human host for an animal host, commonly a piglet or a goat. The Asipu would bind the animal and hold it directly against the patient's chest or head, and if successful, the animal was immediately sacrificed and destroyed in order to trap the disease energy inside the dead carcass and to protect the home from reinfection. However, in the modern era, I feel like regular medical intervention is far more capable of protecting against these entities. At the same time, for all I know, modern medicine may have inadvertently cured Asag as a whole, and that's why Asag sightings are so uncommon. Or it's possible humanity's immune systems have built up a defense and become totally immune over the past 6,000 years or so. It's hard to say. Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up about both proper noun and common noun Asag. I hope you found it informative. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. You can find me on all the regular alt-text sites as well, depending on how tight you've got your tinfoil hat. If you have an entity that you need me to cover, go ahead and let me know in the comments section, or better yet, join us in the Discord server. The link to that one is in the description box down below. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab.